introduce you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this public briefing held by the leader of the opposition, Mr. Thorne, in response to the government's announcement of its National Advisory Council on Citizen Security. The principal speakers here will be Mr. Thorne and Ms. Verla de Pisa. Once again, welcome everyone. Over to you, Mr. Thorne.
Thank you, Rose, and good morning, fellow citizens. Good morning, obviously, to the team here, the team of spokespersons for the Democratic Labour Party on various portfolios in government. I feel constrained to reply to the circumstances in which the Prime Minister has established a National Advisory Council on Citizen Security. And I think we should take the Prime Minister at her word that this is a council that would be advising the government on the matter of citizen security. I feel constrained as well to indicate to the public a certain sequence of events so that the public understands the position that we have taken and the position that we will announce today. On Thursday, I received a call from the Prime Minister extending the invitation to me in my capacity as leader of the opposition to sit on this National Advisory Council on Citizen Security, and that was on Thursday afternoon. To be fair to the Prime Minister, she did try to reach me on Thursday morning on an old phone, and that's why I could not speak to her then. But we finally spoke on the afternoon of Thursday, and I want to assure the public that the exchange was extremely cordial. Those who know the Prime Minister know that she is capable of being a very congenial personality, and we chatted on crime, causes, effects, possible solutions, an extremely cordial exchange. At the end of that, or before the end of that conversation, I told the Prime Minister more than once that the matter had to be referred to the Democratic Labour Party, and she agreed, and she said that she would announce to the country my position of deference and reference of the matter to the Democratic Labour Party, that I would not be making the decision individually as to whether the party, myself, would accept the invitation. Fortuitously, the Executive Council met on Thursday night, and I want to say to the public that the Executive Council engaged very rich and vigorous discussion as to the matter of the invitation to join this council, and we declined the invitation to join it for a number of reasons, and Mr. Pisa will speak on this matter as well. And to be very frank with the public, I feel that I also should say that on Thursday night, when we were meeting as an Executive Council, I received a telephone call. This would have been sometime in the night, 8, 9 o'clock, I'm not too sure, from government headquarters, a lady, and she told me that I am expected to be at Ilaro Court on Friday morning at 11:30. I indicated to her that I had another function and that I could not guarantee my attendance there. Of course, they gave me no agenda. They told me nothing as to why I was expected to be at Ilaro Court on Friday at 11:30. But I don't like hostility, and I just joke with her and say, ask her if she didn't live anywhere, that she's at work very late. Again, very cordial exchanges. I want to say to the public that the Democratic Labour Party, meeting through its executive, declined the invitation. And as I said earlier, Mr. Pisa will go into a lot of the reasons as to why we find it necessary to decline government's invitation. All that is left for me to do is to give the public the assurance that the Prime Minister, again, as she has done in the past, exceeded her legal and constitutional boundaries, and saying to the public that sometime in October, she will be collecting fines for tint. Now, I describe the Prime Minister as being very congenial, have have a conversation with the Prime Minister, and lighthearted, and it is pleasant. But congeniality is not an excuse for being clever. A lot of people came away from her press conference on Thursday disappointed that they did not hear the government speak as to the crisis of violent crime in Barbados. Everybody has come away discussing tint. And they're discussing tint not because it is trivial, but because the Prime Minister has threatened Barbadians to collect monies from them. Now, at a stage of our life where people are in dire financial straits, it scares them when somebody of the high authority of a Prime Minister says to them, I am going to fine you sometime in October if you don't remove the tint from your car. So that a national discourse on violent crime that's afflicting this country becomes a discussion on the question of tint on cars. And we all know why people have tint on their cars. So that the discussion has moved from violent crime to tint. I want to assure Barbadians that the Prime Minister has absolutely no authority to collect fines. Certainly, the question of tint on cars is referred to in the Road Traffic Act of Barbados. The Road Traffic Act deals with traffic offenses. So the question of tint or dark tint is a matter that is dealt with in the Road Traffic Act. The Prime Minister has no business dealing with the Road Traffic Act. The Road Traffic Act, before I go there, I want to remind citizens of this thing called the rule of law. The rule of law essentially prevents high officials of the state and high officials in government from exercising arbitrary power. What the Prime Minister did on Thursday is to indicate an arbitrary exercise of power. That is to say, I want money. I am going to collect money from you. If the tint on your car is too dark, she does not have that power. I'm going to say that more than once. I'm going to give Barbadians the assurance that it will not happen. It cannot happen. If there's something called constitutional law in this country, the Prime Minister has no authority to collect any fines. That raises the question of the Prime Minister's relationship with three agencies of state: the Director of Public Prosecutions, the police, and the courts. The Director of Public Prosecutions is a creature of the Constitution, created and established by the Constitution of this country. The Director of Public Prosecutions is the only person in Barbados who has the authority to initiate or to terminate proceedings in court. The question of the collection of fines is a matter that is dealt with only by the courts. The Prime Minister has no power to initiate court proceedings or to terminate court proceedings. And in this event, the Prime Minister has no authority to initiate any matter that will result in the fining of persons for dark tint on their cars. It is only the DPP, under the law of Barbados, the constitutional and supreme law of Barbados, that can initiate proceedings in court. I saw part of the video, and she said, she turned to the AG and said, she's not interested in prosecuting anybody, she just wants fines. Again, that is so legally flawed. You cannot collect a fine unless you prosecute. And as I've said, it is only the Director of Public Prosecutions acting through the police in relation to the Road Traffic Act that can prosecute. So legally, I don't know who is advising the Prime Minister, but she's wrong. I want to deal with the relationship with the police as well. It is the police, it is the duty of the police to walk around. If they do seek to enforce this law, they've never enforced it. The Prime Minister cannot instruct the police to enforce this law. She cannot. I've said here before, and I'll say it again. Under Section 8 of the Police Act, the Commissioner of Police, in his superintendence of the police service, is answerable and accountable to the head of state. The Prime Minister is not the head of state. The Prime Minister is the head of government. The head of state is the president. And the Commissioner of Police is answerable to the head of state, the president, not to the Prime Minister. Again, I say, the Prime Minister is trespassing, possibly trespassing on the constitutional authority of the head of state, the constitutional authority of the Director of Public Prosecutions, the constitutional authority, the legal authority of the Commissioner of Police. One question arises: if the Commissioner of Police has the authority to charge people with dark tint. Can the Commissioner of Police be influenced by the Prime Minister? No, because of what I've told you earlier. Section 8 gives him absolute power, not absolute, power and authority for the superintendents of that police service, except that he's answerable to the President. There is no role for a Prime Minister. There is no role for any member of government, any member of the cabinet, insofar as the police authority to prosecute people is concerned. That is a very dangerous precedent. That is very dangerous language by the Prime Minister when she threatens to influence the process of prosecutions and fines by persons who carry dark tint. The question of fines, I come to that as well. The question of fines, a fine may be imposed and can be imposed only by a court, a magistrate or a judge. In relation to the Road Traffic Act, in this regard, it is something that is done and can be done only in the magistrate's court, presided over by a magistrate. A magistrate is a part of the judiciary, and one of the essential features of a properly functioning judiciary is that it must be independent. And when it says independent, it means independent of the other two arms of the state. The executive, which is headed, or the cabinet, which is headed by the Prime Minister, and the Parliament, which is headed by the Speaker of the House. That judiciary must not be made subject to the influence of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is so wrong in this regard. There's something called separation of powers. And separation of powers means just what it says. It means that state power has between these three agencies of the state, the cabinet, the Parliament, and the judiciary. Those powers are separate. Those powers must not be consolidated or concentrated in any one person. If it becomes concentrated in any one person, you call that tyranny. The Prime Minister has been guilty of tyrannical statements in the last 24 hours. The Prime Minister has no business interfering in the work of the Director of Public Prosecutions. She has no business interfering in the work of the Commissioner of Police, and she certainly has no business trying to influence the court in terms of fines. That is why we come as a party today to confidently say to you, Barbadians, that the Prime Minister has no legal constitutional authority to impose fines, to collect monies, to come to you at a time when people are really, really anxious about their financial state, and to say to you, I want money. She will not get any money from any Barbadian for having dark tint. She does not have that authority. And we feel as a party that we must give that assurance to Barbadians. We feel that we have to give that assurance. We feel that we must say to you that it is no more than an empty political threat without any legal basis. And we feel as a party that is interested in democracy and interested in preserving democracy in this country that we should give Barbadians that assurance. So please, the discussion as to tint may cease. You can discuss it in a very lighthearted way if you want to. We've seen several memes on it. You can continue to discuss the question of tint in a very lighthearted manner. The serious matter is the matter of violent crime. And the Prime Minister has cleverly taken that off the agenda. And we're all discussing tint. Well, if you choose to discuss tint, as I said, treat that as a lighthearted discussion. We want to assure you that the Prime Minister has exceeded her authority. It threatens an arbitrary exercise of power which she certainly does not have. And I close by saying to you that we feel confident in the decision which we took on Thursday night at the Executive Council of the Democratic Labour Party in politely declining the Prime Minister's invitation to sit on a council which describes itself as advisory. Presumably, you're going to be advising the government on matters of security. On matters of security, apparently, the Commissioner of Police will not be present. The head of the BDF will not be present. Several of government social agencies, certainly the probation department, will not be present. So that while we are not questioning the competencies of those who sit on the council, we are questioning the conspicuous absences of critical persons whose jobs bring them into contact with the question of national and citizen security. So that's our position. I pass back to you, Ms. Aline, and you can introduce Mr. Pizza, who is our spokesperson on legal affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tyranny. You have done my job for me.
Oh dear. I believe it is still morning. Good morning, Barbados. I watched the press conference once. I listened to it first and then I watched it because I wanted to get a better sense of what was happening. First, I want to say welcome back to the Minister of Health to Public Life. He's been missing for a while, but he was at the press conference. And hopefully we will hear from him shortly in relation to matters of health, because that does matter to the people of Barbados. I took note then of an invitation to the party, and that was the first I had heard of it, an invitation to the party to sit on this council. I am not aware that any parameters or terms of reference have been shared, but certainly for the Democratic Labour Party, our own Commission on Crime, which I chair, is well advanced in its activities. We have been active since July of this year. Our research is almost completed. Our meeting last Wednesday, we were discussing structure of the final document. The interviews are in progress on the ground, not just with civic society, but with what most would consider to be uncivil society, because we can't be speaking of correcting crime without speaking of those who have collided with the criminal justice system, because otherwise we would be ourselves another talk shopper, and we recognize that this is not what the people of Barbados want. They actually want some solid proposals. When I listened and watched the conference, what I realized though is that we're being very reactive. The Barbados Police Service, I have to pause because in my head I still have not got accustomed to their new pact. The Barbados Police Service is always to be commended for their clear record in terms of bringing people to charge. They do an admirable job for being, I believe, 1/3 down on what they consider to be their optimum complement. And it will never be a critique of the police service and how they execute. But certainly all of the research that we have unearthed so far has pointed us in the direction of prevention, directing people away from criminal activity by way of social engineering. And this was curiously absent from any of the discussion. And really what we needed to hear was what was going to be done to arrest the crime situation now, as well as in the future. I can understand how a council will address future initiatives, but what was the intention in relation to our current spate of crime was curiously absent from any of the deliberations. Now, at council, we took into consideration that our own commission will shortly be reporting, and we have no difficulty at all because this is a national discussion. We're sharing our research once concluded and sharing our findings and proposals once concluded. And we prefer it in that way because we recognize that governments and governments in waiting have to have direct capacity and direct accountability to the people that they intend to serve, and not to hand it over to any other agency to take responsibility when things fail. You have to have the courage of your convictions and move forward. And that is really what was missing for me. There was a lot of talk about tint, and the conversation in the country and on social media has deviated towards tint. I found that though to be mostly performative. Even outside of the legal framework of a prime minister making those pronouncements, the legislation as it stays is not satisfactory. It doesn't give any guidance as to what is acceptable and what is not. But outside of that, in less than 3 hours from the press conference, I was already receiving ads for alternatives. I received 2 ads for alternatives. So what really are you curing by removing tint or enforcing? Because it's not really a removal of tint. Tint is still going to be allowed to a certain percentage, a certain degree. But if there are already workarounds that the law does not speak to, what really have we achieved? And that is why I refer to it as performative only. I believe that the best representation of that was exactly how the Prime Minister described it, and that is we want money. And that is fine. We understand that, you know, we have the surcharges to pay and things of that nature, but we are also overlaying that on a society that would rather see a council that is put in place to deal with how we reduce the cost of living. To my right, Ryan has constantly been drawing to our attention that we don't have any structure in relation to how we deal with the fuel surcharge. We've been told that there is now a tax on fuel, and we understand that, but we don't know how it operates, because as the prices of petroleum have been dropping internationally, we have found that our prices have not been dropping. And this is some concern to citizens and consumers in this country. It impacts everything, not just those of us who are driving in cars, in vehicles, but supermarkets, because goods have to get here, goods have to be transported within the island. And we really need to have a firm conversation with the government that they explain to us what that policy truly is, so that we have an understanding of what our expectations as a citizenry are. So I found it all to be designed to capture headlines more so than to capture the crime situation. And I believe that it is not unfair to describe it as concepts of a plan. We know where that statement came from, and it seems very appropriate in this regard. And then it is such a large body. I read the names, I understand the concept, because on our own commission, we have been tapping exactly those agencies to give their inputs into our own proposals that will be coming forward. But for me, the takeaway that I want to divert the attention of the country to is twice within that press conference, the Prime Minister made mention of a gun-free society which she favors. And it concerns me, and my initial comment was, how far down the road towards a police state are we willing to march as a country without looking backwards and taking note of where we've come? And the reason why I say that is because we know that with gun amnesty, they do not net the active weaponry. They seem not to net the weaponry that is being used in criminal activity. And if you aim for a gun-free society, there are 2 things that I want to remark on. One is you will leave firearms then in the hands of the armed forces and the criminals. And secondly, the UK has tried significantly reducing and restricting exposure to firearms, and what they have is runaway knife crime. So it doesn't actually address those causes of crime, that preventative effort that we need to make as a country. And that is the focus of our own, the Democratic Labour Party's Commission on Crime. what really we need in the country is a conversation, a very, very serious conversation as to how we restructure our society, starting with the homes and how we parent, moving towards our schools and the quality of the education that we deliver. We have had an internationally renowned education system that has not progressed along with society, that is no longer meeting the needs of, in particular, our young men, that does not reach to the standards internationally that it used to. So it is not fit for purpose, and it is not about educational reform that introduces middle schools. What we're speaking of is more in the lines of curriculum reform and what we present to who ought to be the consumers of education, the students. It is not about the grand output that we have at the end, but ensuring that we have a cohort coming out each year that understands their role in society, that has a skill that they can present to society, never mind to use to support a family. And we will find that when we get to those preventative measures that reroute our citizens away from crime, we will always have some crime. But when we have greater opportunities to participate in the legitimate society, then we will find that we will reduce crime. And I will say it boldly, and I know that I will hold criticism for it, but I don't mind this. When you look at the statistics, you will find that during the 10 years of the last Democratic Labour Party administration, serious crime was down, and it is because the Democratic Labour Party, unfortunately, without advertising what it was doing, paid attention to social constructs. So we had the Icy Bridge program, we had the expansion of sixth form schools, we had CVQs available for technical training within the school system, so that when you leave school, you have something to offer. And these are the initiatives that we found have fallen by the wayside and that need to return. And this is just a little sneak peek. But with the understanding that if you are going to only deal with the Band-Aid, you're not dealing with the actual ailment. And crime for us is an ailment in society that we need to get to the root causes of. And that is why we have been on the street, so that we can talk to people directly. They were a little reticent at first, but they're opening up because they recognize that what we are trying to do is to actually bring real solutions that mean something to people. And if you are going to have advisory councils, then you need to have advisory councils that can be sufficiently proactive, that can respond well. If you have initiatives that are going to go against the private sector, I expect that there will be some pushback from that committee. That, you know, if you have to have some directives that speak to how the schools are operating, you will have the input right there. I get that. But how are you reaching? Because we can say that this is a societal issue, but at the end of the day, policy moves from government. Policy moves from government. And at some point in time, government has to be prepared to take responsibility for its policy initiatives, acknowledge the ones that have failed, pivot, and come again. And that is why in my first statement following the press conference, I called on Minister Lane and Mr. Dottin to report, because they have already been charged with doing exactly what this council is supposed to do. And it is now for the third time without removing the other two. So it is not that we've decided that they're not working, so we're going in a different direction. It is an overlaying for the third time. And I think that where the public purse is concerned, especially in the constrained society, which finds it hard to go to the supermarket and make that dollar spread for their family, in a constrained society which understood why certain roads were fixed for World Cup, but have to drive across the ghost of a road with more pothole than road. I have never seen Vaucluse on top of hill flood until now because of water collecting in holes. When you have a society that sees these things, that gets that our healthcare system is under stress without an end in sight for any repair, when our education system is under stress, when our whole society is fraying at the ends and it is reaching towards the center, when we have conversations only when there are violent streaks and without any conversation about corporate crime, we need to be serious in our discussion of crime. And all of those are features that will be within the report of the Commission on Crime coming out to the Democratic Labour Party, and we reiterate our commitment to working with government by making our proposals available to government and to that council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pisa. And I have a question here coming in. Ports of entry. Our borders are very porous. What proposals you might have to deal with better scrutiny at our ports of entry and around our porous borders? I don't know who wants to take that.
I will go there because we have on our commission touched on that. The first thing that we need to do is define our ports of entry properly. We constantly speak of our airport and our seaport without taking any reference of Port St. Charles, Port Ferdinand, fishing boats landing, pleasure boats docked within our waters, the incapacity of the Coast Guard to respond. How and when are we going to start using technology such as drones in order to manage our borders better? You know, there's so much that could be done and could be spoken of in a government press conference that you shouldn't have to wait on a government in waiting to come and speak to these initiatives. But we're not going to shy away from them because we recognize that if you are only having a partial monitoring of your borders, and I was very curious, I keep using that word because that's the very first impulse that I had on hearing the Prime Minister's words, that you admit that you spent $25 million to replace scanners at the port that are obsolete, tells me that you weren't getting cutting edge technology at that time, because we are 6 years on, and I don't even know that it was done in that first year of their governance. We need to be very serious about it. Scanning at the ports is fine. I remember though when a former administration wanted to put security cameras in the ports, and the government of the day now took issue with that. I also want to speak to how we manage even outside of the borders, because there are containers that are not reckoned at the borders. They go to other warehouses and are supposedly reckoned on those locations. So when we speak of the ports as just the seaport and the airport, we are openly acknowledging that we don't have any control over the situation.
I have another question, probably relates to that. Somebody is suggesting that scanners at the port are not currently working. I don't know if you have any evidence to support that.
I personally don't. But even if they were working, and to be fair, the Prime Minister did say that working or not, they're obsolete. Okay, so they're not fit for purpose for what the police are reporting that they are finding, and that is the firearms coming in components. They're not able to pick up that, and then of course we now have I would have to say a domestic industry through the 3D printing. So whether they're not functioning is really not the point if they're not picking up full function, still not picking up the contraband, then we're still at square one. So we clearly need to manage that better. But how does that help when we have off-site for some containers and we have other ports of entry that are not managed in the same way, and we have our borders that are left unsecured, particularly north and the east coast?
Another question, in the hearings of the commission, the submissions, the question comes, and this person is not interested in what plans could be put in place to stem the flow of guns into this country?
Well, there are two things. They're asking about the flow of guns into the country, but then there's also the problem of the guns that are already here. So you'll have to deal with both. But the monitoring is important. Our international connections are important too, because if they can be intercepted before they arrive here, that will be perfect. That is not our problem, but we benefit. But definitely we need to have security beefed up. And when I say security beefed up, it is not just about equipment, it is about personnel. We need to ensure that our personnel who operate at our ports are themselves above reproach, subject to scrutiny. It is not that hard to determine, but we need to be consistent as well. So just looking at the airport and the seaport is not the consistency that I'm speaking of. We need to be wider than that. We need to be every container that comes in should have a scan. Every bag that you carry out of the airport gets scanned. How is it that that every single container is not scanned? Even if it is unstuffed outside of the port, it ought to be subject to scrutiny before it leaves the port. But then we still have to deal with our other ports that go under the radar, unacknowledged. We have to deal with the boating community and have a serious conversation with them. We need to have our Coast Guard up to scratch. All of it has to happen at the same time.
I'm back on that same topic, Ms. I have another question. Training and resources. You talked about, for want of a better explanation, guns coming in parts. Training for police, customs, to be able to recognize that this piece of plastic thing that came in is a part for the. How do you plan to address that? Or how do you think that should be addressed? Because training obviously is required for customs to be able to identify these things.
Good question. Reason being that our commissioner hasn't got to that point yet. We have decided that our report is going to be costed because there's no point having proposals and then you can't afford them. Okay, so we do intend to have it costed. But here's the thing. We find the money to do what we want to do. There's a lot of money found for airfare. Okay? We need to find the money to do the things that fix our society. I think that has to be a prime job of a government. The security of your citizens has got to be top priority. Therefore, the training of the persons for whom the responsibility falls for security has to be top priority. I know that the police officers go for training regularly, which is why they could trigger and notify, look, this is a problem and we need to have government find a solution. Okay? But it is not fair to expect persons who are intended by their very nature to be reactive to be proactive ones. We expect the police force to be reactive. That is what they do. We expect our customs agents to be reactive. That is what they do. The proactivity comes from government. That is where the proactivity comes. And therefore, it is for government to find that funding. We have, I don't even want to get into the loans conversation because that's a whole other press conference and I won't be in that one. But we know that government can find the funding and grant funding is available too. So find it, get the training done, make it a priority. That really is what is missing. The will to do is what is missing.
I have a question. I don't know if it's a question that's coming in. The deterrent to murder has been eliminated. A solution is, according to this person, is a reintroduction of capital punishment in a much more immediate way, not taking 5 years and more for accused to be brought to the courts. And I think this might be for Mr. Thorne. How can we deal now with perpetrators for murder who are just sentenced to a lifetime of housing, meals, health care, and security? Can this be considered as fair?
Berta just reminded me that capital punishment is not off the books. As we know, the last death penalty was imposed in 1984, June 1984, 40 years ago. What I'd like to say to the person, and this is based on my own professional experience, I find that these days a chap seems not to mind being sentenced to death because he knows that a death penalty, a death sentence, is likely to be dealt with, let me use the word more liberally by the higher courts. That a higher court, if it finds a scintilla of an error committed in the trial court, it will do one of two things: order a retrial or commute the penalty to a long sentence. I find these days, Rose, that the greater deterrent is a long sentence. They don't like long sentences. And you will find that in recent times, the courts have been sentencing 30, 35. I think in 1 or 2 cases, judges have given life sentences.
3.
Yes,
3.
and they don't like it because I'm told that a lot of the young men say, well, if I'm 18 and they give me 15 years, before I'm 40, I'm out. When they get that life sentence, trust me, they don't like it because they know they're coming out with walking sticks. But as Berla said, we should indicate to the public that the death penalty is still on the statute books. I know that when a trial begins now, the Director of Public Prosecutions has the option of saying whether she is pursuing a death penalty or whether she's pursuing a long life sentence. I've said in Parliament before that that law needs to be changed. I've said it here before and I'm going to say it again. This government has loitered on the premises of Parliament for 6 years. And this government has not addressed the issue as to degrees of murder. And it is quite easy to be done. I've said already, and I'm saying it again, that the government needs to introduce degrees of murder so that when a person is charged by the police who are immediate to the details of the offense will know whether it is heinous or will know whether there are mitigating factors. And the police will place that person into a category. If you shoot a child, for example, that's happened in Jamaica some time ago, you take up a gun and you want to take out vengeance on a family, you hold up a child and you shoot the child dead. Now, every reasonable being knows that that is first-degree murder. And it determines, 1, that you don't get bail, and 2, that you are likely to be sentenced to death. Degrees of murder. This government, as I've said, has loitered on the premises of Parliament, and they have paid absolutely no attention to the question of penalties in the event of murder.
I just want to add, in the press conference, I heard the Prime Minister say that before they came to office, there were only 2 judges dealing with criminal matters. That is not correct. Courts 2, 3, 4, and 5 dealt with matters prior to that. They have increased the number of judges. They increased the number of judges before they increased the number of courtrooms that were available on staff.
Exactly.
So it was an absolutely pointless exercise. And in any event, to date, apart from serious crime, which is now prioritized, and that's why you'll see more of those cases being dealt with, the backlog is still ridiculous. Now, I will say that we are at a stage where we are actively within the profession and alongside government discussing procedural rules for criminal processes in the hopes that that will assist. So there are things that are being done at the court level to improve the access to justice and also the passage of cases through, because they're quite right. Being on remand for 5 years is ridiculous, whether you're innocent or whether you're guilty. It is ridiculous because you don't actually know what your status is. So there are things that are being done, and you have to give the kudos where they're deserved. And the intention to bring some streamlining to the processes that get a matter through the court system is welcomed by the profession and definitely by the Democratic Party.
And I have a question coming in.
Well, yes, that is correct. I mean, we're going to do things in stages, huh? I'm sure, when they really should be dealt with together, because we have a lot more cases and exactly the same number of CAP reporters, exactly the same number of probation officers, you know. So before, CAP reporters used to rotate every couple of hours. Now you'll find that you have the same one for the entire trial. Hopefully, you know, carpal tunnel is not an issue later on. But in all seriousness, the support staff also needs to be beefed up, not just speaking about the number of judges and the number of courts that we have.
There have been suggestions that other initiatives put in place, like curfews, etc. Could any of these initiatives work to control the current crime wave? That's the question coming in.
I am so happy that that question came in, because I remember when the Police Act was being debated in Parliament, the major pushback that came from government, from the opposition at the time, which included curfews. I think Jamaica calls them ZOSAs, zones. I don't want to call it correctly, but the initiative is not for an island-wide curfew, but when you know that there's a hot spot, to deal frontally with the issue in the hot spot. And there was significant pushback from government, from this government when in opposition, in relation to that initiative. It was used, I believe, once only when Crab Hill was a hot spot. But I'm very pleased on behalf of the people of St. Lucie to say that in all these statistics that we have so far for the year, none of the homicides has been in St. Lucie. Huh? So there's something to be said for it. It is not a panacea. It's not going to fix it, but it does allow the police to literally arrest a situation, because you can't only have the police have to be reactive. They have to deal with what is happening. That is their job. And that is one of the methods in their arsenal that they can deal with. It is on the statute books. They can use it if they wish.
And I have another question. What plans are there for the many school leavers, since the recent age of criminals seems to be getting younger? I don't know who wants to take that one.
The truth is that I took note of that as well. Within our party chat, there was conversation just a couple of days ago in relation to one youngster in particular who was 17 years old, whose name was released, and international standards have gone in a different direction, and so far Barbados has not implemented that change. that is a protection for the young man, but that does not protect the state, and that certainly does not address what got him to that point. I believe, Rose, that curriculum reform has to be an urgent discussion, because our young people are leaving school. It is almost like a conveyor belt, except that they get spewed out at the end without any certification, without any skill. And I think our education system has reached a point where its efficacy is not apparent outside of a certain band, because we have retained the stress on academia, which is fine, which is great, but if we're not equally valuing skills, equally valuing technical know-how, then a good 2/3, if not more, of our society will constantly be disgruntled coming out of education. And when they are not finding a purpose within society, they are almost being invited to participate in antisocial activity. So the change has to come from within our education system, which is another policy initiative, and that is for government to do.
Rose, this gives us the opportunity to inform the public that a few weeks ago we met in this room, and it was the first meeting of the Education Reform Commission, which we have established here, because we're not waiting on government to tell us what to do. This impressive team that you see here this morning is interested in transforming Barbados and government and governance in Barbados, except that we will listen to the experts, and we have an excellent team that comprises the Education Reform Commission, and hopefully in a few months, and certainly before the election, the public of Barbados will know what is this party's position on education and on education reform.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because I have another question coming in. Should more emphasis be placed on primary education?
Felicia is with us, and all of the experts, Felicia, are telling us that a lot more attention needs to be placed on primary education.
We will be. Good morning, Robin. Good morning. And I would like us to always be mindful that we do understand the impact of crime coming through the younger generation. We have in terms of juvenile justice. Perhaps we do have to look at the juvenile justice bill again to see what kinds of provision. But we have been meeting with our consultants. We have been meeting on a regular basis so that we could start working on behalf of the people. I mean, it's important that we have to look at not in terms of just academia, as Berber has highlighted, that was supposed to have highlighted, but primarily in terms of how do we build a good citizen? How do we build citizens with morality? And how do we encourage them to be more responsible for the actions? It's also, we have to take a very closer look to the Education Act as well. I believe one of the challenges that this Minister of Education is doing is there are so many breaches of the Education Act. And the Education Act is not a suggestion, it's a law. And those kinds of concerns, it's really in terms of our young persons are the ones that are becoming victims of those breaches. So the party, the Democratic Labour Party, will be working with our Education Commission. And as I said before, it's all members of society, teachers, principals, parents, unions, and everybody else will be working with us so that we can at least work together as a society, because crime is not separate from education. Crime is not separate from any part of our society. It affects all our society. But what is deeply concerning is that it affects our young persons. If you look at the age group, and which is very important, and the research is showing that again, if we go to dots, we will see it. We will see where many of our perpetrators are coming from. The age group, the educational background, and this is what we're working for. We're not doing things ad hoc. We're ensuring that we conduct the research that is needed. We're ensuring that we take into consideration the types of intervention that is needed, so that we do not look at education in isolation, but what is required of us as a party to bring policy development towards the country.
And I have one more question coming in, Mr. Thorne. How do you plan to tackle some of the social issues that are contributing to the increase in violent crimes?
You know, we have mentioned culture over and over. And if you listen to Felicia just now, you go into the, look, one of the things that shocked this country was that video of the primary school children. If they behave like that, they're mimicking something and somebody. That's a question of culture. While Felicia was speaking, I was thinking, a man who shoots a man at the age of 16 and shoots him dead, he did not become a criminal a few minutes before he did that. He was becoming a criminal from a long time ago. There was something that was leading him to that act. There was something that was involving him in that lifestyle. And it is all a question of culture, lifestyle, the entertainment that we are promoting, the absence of religious values from the lives of young people. I've heard the church people complaining about it. The total absence of, look, when we went to primary school, not only was it arithmetic and English and writing and social studies, but it was an entire value system into which we were being inculcated. Young people now are not inculcated into that value system. And I say this, even the bright ones are missing something in their lives. I like to say, and I'm not being alarmist here, but something is going wrong in Barbados. I'm in the presence of my former Sunday school teacher here, he's staring at me. There seems to be what a philosopher in the United States calls a spiritual darkness that is hanging over Barbados. Nobody, or a lot of people don't seem to make the choice between right and wrong, Wesley. A lot of young people don't make that choice. They just do something for the sake of expediency, not based on any principle. And that is something that is seriously wrong in Barbados. I say it's a question of culture. It's a question of how we train our young people, the kind of society into which we bring our young people. We're not bringing our young people into the kind of society that we were brought up in. And that's one of the major problems in Barbados. Look at it. Our entertainment, or everything we do now is being done differently. You drive up the street, two side arguing, or conversing, or they're fighting with each other on the street. That is, I did not see that when I was growing up. And it is an everyday thing. It's a question of culture. The kind of culture that we are promoting in this country, I come back to government, a government that emphasizes revelry over discipline. I was driving down Top Rock 2 mornings ago and I saw the advertisement for the football, and I'm going to address this with Dawn at some point. The poster for the football competition has at the top, I think, football, and then next to it, $260,000. So everything is transactional. Government has taken this country into a materialist culture, and nothing has value unless you attach money to it. So that government sets a price on people's lives, but government does not put a value on people's lives. And that is an important distinction that needs to be made. Everybody now has a price, but nobody has any value. So the poster for the football, rather than focus on interchange and exchange and wholesome exchange between communities, it focuses on money. How much money I'm going to give you if you succeed? A price, but where's the value in people's lives? None. Where's the value in community interaction? David, may I say that in a few weeks we hope to have a cricket tournament, and there'll be no money involved. It'll be like the old days. You play for the pride in your village. That's what you do. You know? So, Rose, it is a whole cultural vortex into which we have placed our young people, and their lives seem to have little value. That's why a man can kill another man and walk into the police station and surrender himself. No value in their lives, but they have a price. And everybody, why do you think they were the gold and so on? This is my price. But where's the internal value? Absent. Absent. And the government is contributing to that.
I have one final question. Family. We come back to this whole issue. Social issues. Families first. How do we start to rebuild the family? It's a difficult question.
It is a difficult question. Look, I hear people saying, "Oh, the young people are having children young." Look, in the old days, our parents and grandparents left school, 14 years old, and by the time they were 16, 18, they were big hardback people working. So I don't think, with children. So I don't think there's this change now that people get children early. People have always been getting children early. The problem now is that people don't mature as quickly. Our mothers and fathers, by the time they were 16, they were very mature people. 18, they were mature. You're seeing young people now, and I hope they don't take the criticism too hard. But children, again, it's the culture. Young people don't mature as quickly now as they used to be, and it's our fault. It's the fault of technology, the dependence on technology, and the absence, as I said earlier, of personal work. So people are not maturing as quickly as they should do. The question of families, again, the church has a role, the state has a role. The state always has a role. Although the state was disestablished from the church in 1969, the state has massive resources at its disposal. How does the state use those resources? And as I say, this impressive team here will work in a democratic fashion together to come up with solutions to all the problems that confront us. And we don't do it by ourselves. That is why we have established commissions, and we have gone into the public domain, and we have consulted with our experts. And our commission, as you know, has church people on it, has other professionals on it.
I'm sorry I said that. It was the final question, but we have so many.
They're coming in.
They're coming in. Someone is asking, can we look at providing a program to instill skills and opportunity to between the 200 to 300 school leavers who can't get into six forms, nor can they get into the polyclinics, and that is something that.
You know, we had a problem here recently of a young man who was accepted into skills training and couldn't get it. How do we reach that stage where we are unable to find space for our young people to learn a skill? Should not be happening. I wonder if Felicia, I don't want to trespass on your area, but I wonder if we should not be revisiting.
That's what I was saying, that it's important. And the commission, we have been looking at that as well. I believe the Education Act speaks that the school leavers are 16, but we're thinking it's in this era. I think it's we're thinking that it's a little bit too early with other kinds of opportunities and support unit that they would need. And so perhaps we may be considering having them leave at 18 as opposed to 16, so that we can provide the opportunity, the skills, and of course, in terms of the intervention that they need, because some young persons, as I said before, we do not primarily look at in terms of the academics, but also vocational training is very important. There was a time where we had a lot of young men engaging in those various programs, but now we're not seeing that. And so we want, again, to remind persons, as much as we're seeing the levels of crime amongst young persons, we have to remember the state has to provide the opportunities for those young persons, whether it's academics, whether it's vocational, because every young person has a dream. Every young person believes that they can become someone in the society. And we, as a Democratic Labour Party, we have to give them hope. We have to inspire young persons to ensure that they know that they can achieve and become someone in this country, not only just a few members of society, that they can contribute meaningfully to this country. So our idea primarily at this point is really to work in terms of the dynamics, in terms of what would be some of the long-term goals. But I believe that the Education Act need to be revisited because we're dealing with a different dynamic. We want to ensure if we're dealing with educational reform, can we afford? I mean, and the reality is, and let's not, let's look at what is happening. We are thinking about our young persons committing those offenses, but in the past week, we have seen the conditions of schools. How do we expect any human person to be in those environments and expect them to be progressive members of society? We have to have that ability to treat our young persons with a sense of dignity. And it's important that we look at in terms of what we can do better, not only in terms of educational reform, the curriculum, but the physical component of the schools are very important. We need our children to be in safe environments. We need our young persons to feel that when they go to a school, that it is a school that is conducive for them as individuals, but also that they see themselves having a sense of dignity and a sense of worth. And I think it's important that we look at it in a very holistic manner in terms of educational reform, but also in terms of the Education Act. It's very important that we revisit this policy, we revisit this law so that it can adapt to the environment that we're in right now.
Rose, could you permit us to go to Dr. Dawn Marie Armstrong, who is our spokesperson on sports?
Sorry, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, sorry. It's just interesting to hear all the debates and, the expressions of the interest of culture and education. But we have forgotten one of the most important life skills, and I think one of the most important things our body can do, and that is move. And therefore, by understanding the importance of persons possessing the superior ability to be quicker, to be faster, to be stronger, recognizing that our young people have talents that go way beyond the classroom. Also seeing now with the Prime Minister's Cup, the fact that young, talented men, I wish there was a cup for women as well. Recognizing that there's a gender imbalance, not only just in the issues in our country, but recognizing that sport, again, is being taken for granted and young men are being utilized in a tokenistic way, again, in terms of being given money and compensated for their superior ability to move. We recognize that those young men did not just start playing sport. They probably have been playing for several years. It takes 10 years to specialize in any given sport. So between the ages of 18 to 35, we know some of those young men probably would be in primary school when they started playing the football. And had that talent been recognized early on, recognizing that not everyone has the capacity to learn in the traditional way that we see education to be, I believe that the Prime Minister's Cup needs to be further developed into academies beyond the conclusion of the tournament to begin to engage our young people at the community level, compensate them, even if it's not in money, but scholarships, give families hope for the future that their young man or young woman would be able to receive the benefits, that they should with respect to sporting talent and sporting development. I've traveled the world. I have seen what sport can do for countries, for communities. I can see what sport can do in terms of transforming the lives of individuals. And taking a pot of money to, spread across a few communities is doing a great disservice to what sport development can become in the country. And for me, I believe that we are speaking of these different factions and the different ministries and the different facets of holistic human development, failing to recognize that all of us need to come together and contribute to what we see the model Barbadian citizen to be. We see Seda Williams and we saw what she's done. Shade Williams, sorry. We see what Seda Williams, sorry. We see what she was able to.
Miss Williams.
Miss Williams. Yeah, because I know she's pretty stickler on the way her name is pronounced. So Shade Williams. We've seen what she's been able to do with the little resources available to her. And we also recognize that in missing our moment with Obadele back in 2000, the money that was invested into the Prime Minister's Cup needs to be invested significantly into the development of sport so that we can see the Shade Williams in time to come. So take away the educational development, as important as it is, recognizing that there are other ways for young people to develop, to grow, to earn. Sports persons are some of the richest persons in the world. And if we neglect that, then we neglect the future of our country and the economic driver that sport can become. And I think that's my take on it.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. I will leave the last word to the leader of the opposition.
Thank you, Rose. This gives us the opportunity to introduce our various spokespersons. I don't know how we are going to do it. David, are you going to do the camera around the room so that everybody says who she or he is? First. So.
Start.
Alvin Tobin, spokesperson on culture and creative arts. Simon Clark, spokesperson on community development and social welfare.
Good afternoon, Shakwani Hood, spokesperson for youth affairs and development.
Good afternoon, Richard Seeley, spokesperson for tourism and international transport.
Good afternoon, I'm Gilden Ward, spokesperson on agriculture and the green economy.
Dr. David Eswick, spokesperson on economic affairs, international business and investment.
Melissa Howard, ambassador for single mother.
Afternoon, Neil Marshall, spokesperson on labor and international relations.
Good morning, Paul Gibson, spokesperson on the environment.
Good afternoon, Senator Andre Rose, spokesperson for health and policies.
Good morning, Barbados. My name is Andrew Gibbs, spokesperson for maritime affairs.
Good morning, everyone. Felicia Dijon, spokesperson for education.
Good afternoon again, Dr. Domri Armstrong, spokesperson on sport.
Good afternoon, Pedro Shepherd, spokesperson, public works, transport, and road.
Verla De Pisa, spokesperson on home affairs and the attorney general's.
Ryan Walters, spokesperson on energy, business development and entrepreneurship, and housing.
We are extremely pleased to welcome to our team, there's Mr. Nathaniel Boyce. As I said at the conference, the spokespersons will be extended, so Nathaniel will be on board with us very shortly with a specific portfolio. And there is Dr. Wickham. We're extremely proud to welcome Dr. Wickham. Shy one in the corner here. Dr. Pastor John Wesley Carter. John Wesley Carter, he must be a Methodist. Well, welcome, John. John is our John will guide us on ecclesiastical matters and matters of spiritual guidance. John, special welcome to you.
Thank you.
He doesn't want me to do this, but Dr. Wickham, we're extremely pleased, and Nathaniel, to welcome you to this body. We hope we can persuade you to go farther with us. He's such an outstanding young man. Both of them outstanding young people. And I want to assure the public that we feel very proud and pleased that we have been attracting people of substance, people of quality to this Democratic Labour Party, people who are prepared to put self behind them and to work for the good of this party and to work for the good of this country. So welcome to this Democratic Labour Party that is going forward and looking forward, not necessarily to an election, but looking forward to working with and among the people of Barbados in the coming weeks and months ahead. Whatever is God's will as to the outcome of the election, that will be God's will, but we intend to work with and for the people of Barbados. So thank you very much for attending to this briefing today, and we will do this often and from time to time. Let me say that Senator Worrell goes to the Senate, not for the first time, next week. He returns to the Senate next week, and we wish you all the best. So thank you very much. Thank you, David. Thank you, Rose, for attending to us. And I think the last word is yours.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and participating, sending your questions. We really appreciate your interaction with us this morning. And right after this when we're finished, the Education Reform Committee will be meeting. So we are working. Thank you very much and have a good weekend, folks.
Good, yeah.